Real events that sound like science fiction. There are stories so unbelievable that it is hard to believe that they really happened. And yet the world is full of events that defy logic and look like movie scripts. Can a person survive 2 nuclear explosions and return to normal life? Could the inventor of the first movie camera disappear without a trace before he could present his creation to the world? What if a young child recounts detailed memories from a previous life that turn out to be true? These are just some of the events we will discuss today. Each of these stories is true, although it sounds like fiction. Before you are stories that still intrigue and stimulate the imagination. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who survived 2 atomic bombs. Some events in history seem so improbable that it is hard to believe they actually happened. One such case is the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a man who survived 2 atomic bombs and lived to a ripe old age. In the early days of the 8th month of 1945, Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on business. He was an engineer and worked for one of Japan's largest companies. Early on August 6th of that year, he left his hotel, preparing to return to his hometown. Then the sky above him lit up with a blinding light. Seconds later, a shock wave threw him to the ground, and the air temperature rose dramatically. He was a few kilometers from the epicenter, but he still suffered serious burns, and his hearing was partially damaged by the blast wave. Shaken but alive, he decided to return to his hometown. Little did he know that he was heading straight for a second atomic explosion. 3 days after the first explosion, he was in Nagasaki and had already told his family and superiors what he had seen in Hiroshima. Then something happened that seemed almost impossible. A second atomic mushroom cloud appeared over the city. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was the only person to survive 2 nuclear explosions and was in both cities at their critical moment. Despite this unimaginable nightmare, he managed to survive and live to a ripe old age. He spent the rest of his life telling the world about the scale of destruction and human suffering that he had seen with his own eyes. His story has become a symbol of the extraordinary survival, courage, and tragic fate that befell the people of Japan in the last days of World War II. Louis Le Prince, the inventor of film who disappeared without a trace. Today, cinema is one of the most powerful branches of the entertainment industry, and the history of film is mainly associated with the Lumiere brothers and Thomas Edison. However, few people know that the true pioneer of cinematography, Louis Le Prince, created the first working movie camera many years earlier. His invention could have changed the history of cinema if the inventor himself had not mysteriously disappeared. Louis Le Prince was a French engineer and artist who experimented with recording moving images at the turn of the 19th century. In 1888, he managed to record the first ever film, showing people walking in a garden in the English city of Leeds. His invention worked well, and Le Prince planned a major presentation that would make him a forerunner of cinema. But before he could show his work to the world, he disappeared under mysterious circumstances. In September 1890, he went to France to visit his family. On the 16th of that month, he boarded a train from Dijon to Paris, and never arrived. When the train stopped at its final stop, there was no trace of Le Prince. His luggage, documents, or body were not found. There were no witnesses who could confirm what happened to the inventor. His disappearance gave rise to numerous theories. Some suggested suicide, others, kidnapping. The most controversial hypothesis was that he could have fallen victim to Thomas Edison, who at the time was fighting for dominance in the world of inventions, and later patented his own version of the camera. In the 21st century, French archives revealed a photograph of an unidentified man fished out of the Seine shortly after Le Prince's disappearance. Was it him? To this day, no one knows, and his story remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of invention. Brooke Greenberg, the girl who never grew up. The human body is programmed to grow, mature, and age. But what if that process stops altogether? Brooke Greenberg's story is one of the greatest mysteries in medicine, a girl who never grew up, despite living for 2 decades. Brooke was born in the United States in Baltimore. She was born prematurely, but her parents had no reason to worry. At first, she developed like any other child. However, over time, it became clear that something was wrong. When she was a few years old, doctors noticed that her body had stopped growing, and her mental development had stopped at the infant stage. When her peers were starting school and learning to talk, Brooke still had the body and cognitive abilities of a 9-month-old. She wasn't growing, she wasn't maturing, and her body didn't seem to obey any known laws of biology. At 10, she looked like an infant, a little over 70 centimeters tall and weighing no more than 80 kilograms. Doctors were helpless. They tested her genes, looked for hormonal imbalances and rare mutations, but found no cause for her condition. They called it Syndrome X because they didn't know what was causing her body to not go through the natural stages of life. What's more, different parts of her body were aging at different rates. Her bones were like those of a child, but some organs had the characteristics of an adult. Brooke Greenberg lived for 20 years, but she remained an infant trapped in an adult's body all that time. She died in 2013 from health complications. Her case remains one of the greatest medical mysteries to this day, and scientists studying the aging process are trying to discover whether her secret can help humanity fight the diseases of old age. The boy who remembered his past life, the case of James Leininger. Stories of people remembering their past lives appear in various cultures, but they are usually lacking evidence. But James Leininger's case is different. It is one of the best documented cases suggesting that past life memories may exist. James was an ordinary American boy, but when he was about 2 years old, he began having recurring nightmares. He would wake up terrified, screaming, "The plane's on fire! I'm falling! Help me!" His parents initially thought it was just childhood fears, but the boy began to provide extraordinary details. He claimed to have been a fighter pilot in World War II who had been shot down by Japanese soldiers. He mentioned an aircraft carrier called Natoma and his best friend, Jack Larson. The parents were skeptical, but began to check the information. To their surprise, all the details matched. The aircraft carrier USS Natoma Bay did indeed take part in the war, and in its squadron served pilot James Houston, who died in the Battle of Iwo Jima. Even more amazing, the boy had an extraordinary knowledge of aircraft design from that period. As a young child, he would correct adults when they mislabeled parts of a fighter plane. When his family met with veterans who knew James Houston, they were shocked. The little boy knew details that only someone who was actually there could know. As James grew older, his memories gradually faded, and he stopped talking about his past life. But his story remains one of the most intriguing reincarnation mysteries. Is it possible that human memory can extend beyond one lifetime? Is there something we don't yet understand about human consciousness? The case of James Leininger remains controversial to this day, and a mystery that science cannot fully explain. Felix Baumgartner, the man who jumped from the stratosphere. For centuries, humans have dreamed of conquering the skies, but jumping from the edge of space seemed impossible, until the day Felix Baumgartner decided to do something no human had ever done before. He jumped from a capsule at an altitude of almost 40 kilometers, falling freely at the speed of sound. The project, which was called Red Bull Stratos, had been planned for many years. The aim of the mission was to test how the human body reacts to the extreme overload and lack of pressure during a free fall from such a huge height. Until now, no one had dared to do something like this. It was not certain whether a human could survive such a journey without a plane or a rocket. On October 14, 2012, the entire world watched as Felix climbed higher and higher in a stratospheric balloon. The cabin was eerily silent, and all that could be seen through the window was black space. Finally, after several hours of flight, he reached the altitude from which he was to jump. When he opened the hatch of the capsule, the view was incredible. The curvature of the earth stretched out beneath his feet, and the sky was almost completely black. A moment later, he uttered only one sentence: "Time to return to Earth." And he jumped. In the first seconds of flight, he lost control of his body. He began to spin at a dizzying speed, which could have led to loss of consciousness. After a while, however, he managed to stabilize his flight and broke the sound barrier, reaching a speed of over 1,300 kilometers per hour. After 4 minutes of free fall, he opened his parachute and landed safely in the New Mexico desert. His feat went down in history as the first jump in which a human reached supersonic speed without the aid of a machine. Felix Baumgartner's mission opened up new possibilities for future spaceflight and research into extreme weather conditions. What once seemed impossible became a fact. Roy Sullivan, the man who survived 7 lightning strikes. A single lightning strike is enough to kill a person or leave them with severe burns. The chances of someone being struck in their lifetime are incredibly small. Now imagine a person who survived 7 lightning strikes. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it actually happened. Roy Sullivan was a national park ranger in the United States and had spent most of his life outdoors. He was first struck in the 1940s while in a watchtower during a storm. Lightning struck the building, causing a fire that spread to his clothes. Fortunately, he survived, although he suffered severe burns. Another incident occurred decades later, when Sullivan was driving a car. Usually, the metal structure of a vehicle acts as a Faraday cage, protecting against lightning, but in this case, it did not work. The lightning pierced the roof of the car and struck him. In the years that followed, he was struck several more times, while patrolling the park, walking in the woods, and even standing in front of his own home. In one instance, lightning not only struck him, but also set his hair on fire. After a few such incidents, Sullivan began carrying a bucket of water with him to quickly put out the flames if necessary. His unusual story caused people to avoid being around him during storms. Some considered him a living lightning magnet. Others joked that he attracted storms like a lightning rod. Despite all these dramatic events, Roy Sullivan lived for many years and went down in history as the man with the most documented lightning strikes on one person. No one can explain to this day why he was so susceptible to this unusual phenomenon. Hiroo Onoda, a soldier who didn't know the war was over for 3 decades. Hiroo Onoda's story is so extraordinary that it could be the plot of a movie about a loyal soldier who doesn't realize his fight is over. For 3 decades, he hid in the jungle, believing the war was still going on. In 1944, Onoda, a young officer in the Japanese army, was sent to the Philippine island of Lubang. His superiors gave him clear orders: never surrender, not believe any propaganda, and fight to the end. When Japan announced its surrender the following year, news of it did not reach all the soldiers on distant fronts. Onoda and several of his companions did not believe that the war was over. When they found leaflets announcing the Japanese surrender, they considered them a trick of the enemy. Over time, the number of hiding guerrillas decreased. Some surrendered, others died. Finally, Onoda was left alone, convinced that he still had his military duty to fulfill. For decades, he lived a life of secrecy, hunting animals, avoiding the island's inhabitants, and leading guerrilla attacks, believing he was still fighting the enemy. He distrusted any information that might indicate the war was over. In 1974, almost 30 years after the end of the conflict, the case of Hiroo Onoda became famous in Japan. The authorities decided to send his former superior, who personally ordered him to surrender. Only then did Onoda understand that the war was truly over. Upon his return to Japan, he was welcomed as a hero, although to many people he was a symbol of a man stuck in the past. He eventually moved to South America, where he spent the rest of his life. His story remains one of the most incredible examples of loyalty and discipline the world has ever known. Some stories are so extraordinary that it is hard to believe they actually happened. And yet the fates of these people and the events they experienced are well documented and confirmed. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived 2 atomic bomb explosions. Louis Le Prince created the first motion picture camera, but disappeared without a trace. James Leininger recounted from an early age the details of the fighter pilot he could never have known. And Felix Baumgartner broke the sound barrier by jumping from the stratosphere. Roy Sullivan was struck by lightning 7 times, and Hiroo Onoda didn't know the war was over for 3 decades. Each of these stories shows how unpredictable, unusual, and full of secrets reality can be. How many more events have escaped our attention? How many mysteries are waiting to be discovered? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you want, and see you in the next episode.